think the discussion about translation is important because it is true. Most of us, we're looking at an English Bible, so it's important to understand the process behind that, and it's important to understand what goes on behind that. Not that everyone has to become an expert, but it's helpful. And I think that could be a fruitful discussion, perhaps, between Hebrew Israelites and Christians as we continue these discussions. So I don't know if you guys want to talk about that or some of the other stuff you brought up.
Well, like I said, I'm not really an expert when it comes to the Hebrew language. I'm still learning things myself. I guess we can just briefly chat about your positions when it comes to Christianity and the Hebrew Israelite belief. You seem to have a sort of a issue with that. I would like to get more of your understanding with that.
Sure. Well, as you know, of course, there's all kinds of Hebrew Israelites and different groups and leaders and teachers and books and all that. So, I recognize it's diverse. It's part of what I was saying. And one of those clips you played is I try to learn the differences so we're not lumping in everyone together. And I did mention how I do not observe Hebrew Israelites doing the same thing when it comes to Christians. Usually I feel like conversations I hear, most of the guys and gals I hear or interact with don't really understand what basic Christian doctrine is and has been. And definitely not real up on differences between, let's just say major differences. I don't mean every little church, but, right. Just some major grouping, Pentecostalism, cessationists, these major groupings of ideas that are, pretty historically established. So I think that would help too if there was a bigger understanding of that, So when it comes though to Hebrew Israelism, I mean, the general position is not the problem with the identity claim. It's often with what it produces. So I have friends who say, hey, I'm a Hebrew, but then they'll say, but I believe the gospel like you do, Vocab. Now, I'll tell you, there's not a whole lot of these kinds of friends. So I'm not acting like I have a ton of them, okay? But they do exist. For example, ex-Sakari member Shabar, he still is about the identity claim. It's very important to him. We've talked a little bit about that, but really when we talk, it's more about issues relating to the gospel and things like that. And, he sent me a video recently where he was out on the street like you would normally see a One West camp. He was in Chinatown, actually, somewhere. And he was speaking, and he was speaking the gospel. Now, we would not agree about everything he said in the video, but I see like a positive direction where I believe he's trying to go. I don't sit around and nitpick and try to argue with him and say, well, no, we'll build or whatever. But it's not like, well, this identity thing, because for the most part, we're able to kind of see past that and realize it's not the most important feature. So I kind of don't bother him about it, and he doesn't bother me about me not completely agreeing with all the things he says. And I feel like it's a mutual respect as far as that goes. So it doesn't have to be, constantly like this. But what I see a lot of people is, if they feel that you don't agree with the claim, or you want to make a more subtle version of the discussion where it's like not as simplistic, or if you don't agree with some of the implications of the claim or applications of the claim, then people become upset. And so that's my main issue, is the application of the claim, meaning not only am I an Israelite, but therefore it means this. And most of the applications I think are usually wrong. That's my main issue, because I don't think it's biblical. I think it not only goes against the new covenant, but actually the vision of the old covenant. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of what you guys in particular believe. So I've heard some, like I heard you talk about who Jesus died for and whatnot, but I try to hear where people are before, I assume. So I don't know where you guys are at on those issues, but that's the main issue, is the application of the claim. It's usually theologically problematic, I believe.
Okay. So let's keep it simple. Once again, I want to thank you for coming on. Let's just keep it simple and address those two issues. And the the claims that you say that Hebrew Israelites are making. I want to ask you this first. What is your stance on so-called Black people, Negro people being the actual descendants of the Israelites in the Bible?
You're talking about flesh and blood? You're saying are Black Americans equal to are they essentially the same group as the Israelites of the Bible? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like are we the actual blood descendants of the Israelites in the Bible?
So there's a lot of problems there, in my view. One is Black Americans is a general vague category that includes all kinds of people from all over the world, all over the continent. So I don't even think that can be answered. But by and large, the population that's identified as Black American is not, by and large, from what I've seen, any substantial data, a Semitic population. So the basic answer would be no. But to me, that's not the most important thing. But if someone wants to discuss it, of course we can discuss it. I don't see the evidence, and I don't think that that's really what we're supposed to be doing under the new covenant set of instructions, is trying to figure that out. I don't spend much time trying to figure it out until I talk with Hebrew Israelites. Then we got to talk about it because they want to talk about it, though. You know.
So you mentioned the evidence. I want to really get where you stand. I'm sure you've heard and seen a lot of different things. So this is really about you right now. In terms of the evidence, what is it that has drawn you away or has caused you not to be in agreement with that? So-called, when I say Black people, I'm not speaking of all Black people. I'm speaking particularly of so-called African American people, of the diaspora, so to speak. What is it in terms of evidence that you see as an issue with our people making that claim or making that statement that we are the people? Because I don't really see it as a claim. What would be what's your issue with that in terms of the evidence?
Well, one is I think it's a newer claim, and newer claims I think we should be wary of. Doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong automatically, but it's a newer, not an older claim. I think that may be part of the debate. Specifically, late 19th century, a couple men who had visions. That's the first time we have someone explicitly saying. I don't mean implicit. Usually when people say that's wrong, Vocab's lying, they'll go to things that they think are implicit or parallels, but no explicit claim. The first explicit claim is with Reverend William Christian, and then shortly after that, Crowdy. And those are in the 1890s. 1892 to 1895 is when that activity happened. Christian says he received his vision in 1889, but the book came out in 1892. So one is that it's new. Two is it's disconnected from what the continent's inhabitants say about themselves by and large. And I think that probably be another point of disagreement. People usually say, well, you're lying, but the question is, what's the evidence? So
let me stop you real quick. When you say the continent, you speaking of Africa? Yeah.
The idea that you have a continent, let's go to the West Coast. The idea that you have a coast full of people who are saying, no, actually we're Semitic in any substantial way is fallacious. You see recent activity among Igbo, but it's all post-colonial, meaning after they came in contact with Europeans who sometimes told them, maybe some of you guys are lost Israelites. Tudor Parfit has a wonderful book on this that really shows the history of it, really without a doubt. But not only that, you have people who say, no, here's our tradition. It's of griots, and here's our traditions. It's of this drum circle, and here's our tradition. It's of this. It's not Semitic stuff. Every now and then you can find a parallel, but it's not Semitic. And I'll give you the biggest problem with relating the West Coast of Africa to being filled with Semitic populations. There's no paper trail, specifically a paper trail of the Tanakh. Historically, no matter how persecuted they were, everywhere Jews went, they had their writings with them. And those survived at all costs. Even when Nazis burnt down synagogues, Jews still had biblical scrolls. And this is something that we see throughout the history. There's really no paper trail where you have a long line of Hebraic scrolls that go back to when the diaspora dates would be given for the Hebrew Israelite thesis. To me, that's a major problem. When I say this, some people say, well, there's this exception. They'll try to bring something up, and often they don't have many details about it, so it's hard to check the claim. But I think by and large, we all know there's really no paper trail of Tanakh or even things that Jews commonly do, which is add interpretations of the law. So I'm not saying the Talmud per se, but something Talmudic, because Jews always want to know, how do we practice this law in real life? And that's where these oral traditions come in, and eventually they get codified. There's nothing like that on the west coast of Africa. There's nothing like the Zohar, like these mystical Jewish iterations that combine different. There's just nothing like that. It's really a different set of religions. You have not just animism, but you do have animism. You do have ancestor, heavy reverence for ancestors, sometimes which is interpreted as worship. I'm not saying that other people don't care about their ancestors, but it's just done a certain way. And I'm not saying that's all that's there, because West Africa is a diverse place, but you really don't see anything that looks very Semitic. And why it's like honestly, the same reason I don't believe the Anglo-Israelite thesis that Brits are Israelites, it's very similar to the reasons I don't believe the Hebraic Israelite thesis. Very similar reasons,
I see. So we're talking about records, paper trails, things that can trace back. What about the historians on the Jewish side who establish and prove how the people who claim to be Jews today have no actual tie or connection with the ancient Israelites?
Do you mean like Josephus?
No, I mean like modern day historians.
Oh, you mean like Kessler?
I mean, it's many of them.
Well, there's really Shlomo Sands and Arthur Kessler are really the two people that usually people bring up in this context. I mean, who are you thinking of?
What's the guy? I forget his name. Ford. What's his first name, brother Yash? What's that guy's first name?
You mean Henry Ford?
Henry Ford.
Well, he definitely was anti-Semitic, but he's not a historian. He was a car manufacturer and an entrepreneur.
Well, yeah, he was a car manufacturer, but a lot of his sources come from actual historical sources that prove that these people don't have a connection with the ancient people.
So Henry Ford also banned black folks from living in Dearborn, the company town.
Right. I mean, I'm specifically just dealing with the information part, because once again, him making that point is not necessarily saying that he's proven that we're the people. You get what I'm saying? It's like there are a lot of Jewish historians who proved that modern day Jews have no connection with ancient Israel. They're not proving that we're the people, but they're establishing that these people who claim to be the people are not the people either.
Yeah, I'm just saying, though, there's a lot of people who dislike, Jews and stuff like that, and they'll say they're not the people. Anglo-Israelites, Christian identity, the Klan. I mean, there's a whole long list, but it doesn't really have anything to do with Hebrew Israelism, because they don't then think that Black Americans are. So right. Let's just say that someone disproved that all modern Ashkenazi are frauds. Someone proved that. Let's just say that wouldn't then automatically put in its place some other group per se. That would have to be established separately. It's a multiple step process. And as far as, Ashkenazi, I hope people, know, watching, modern day Jewry is not just Ashkenazim. They maybe I hear different stats. Sometimes I'll hear 60%, meaning, out of the population who is Ashkenazi, but there's lots of other types. Most people know Sephardim, but that's also not only the group, There's right. Folks from Egypt and Yemen and it came out of Iraq. The Persian Israelite. Some of these communities even have some evidence that they go back to when the captivity was, and they just never left. Those Jews who are in Iraq, which is ancient Babylon, they don't look like modern day Hebrew Israelites. Now, they also don't really look quite like Ashkenazim. They look very similar to their Arab neighbors and cousins. When you see Iraqi Jews, you're seeing people who say, now most of them are gone because Iraq has essentially got rid of almost the Jewish population, but you can find older pictures and pictures of people who are descendants who are alive from what are sometimes called Baghdadi Jews. They don't look like Europeans for sure, but these folks have evidence that they go back to the Babylonian captivity itself. That is a massive pedigree. That's something that should be taken seriously. So we can't just discount everyone who claims to be a Jew. Now, within the Ashkenazim population, not everyone who thinks they're descendant from Jacob is, as far as genetics. Genetics show that not everyone in those groups, as far as the large gene pool, these are population studies, has Semitic DNA. A lot of them is just Eastern European. And then there's other things that happen that I would recognize. For example, a lot of Russians who wanted to get out of the USSR when it fell, some of them got fake papers as if they were Jewish to sneak into Israel. They would claim, and Israel eventually caught wind of it and now makes specifically people coming from Russia do much more work to prove that they're of Jewish extraction. But things like that can happen. I don't deny that. But that's different than saying the Hebrew Israelite thesis is accurate or true or proper. And by and large, it does not seem to be, because when I look at Iraqi Jews, they don't look like the guys who are one Westers. It's different haplogroups by and large. It's different cultures, different customs. It's different everything. But they have good reason for us to believe them. They came out of Iraq, where ancient Israel was. And same thing with Persia, because Persia, well, not called Persia now, Iran. Same thing with the Persian communities. Do we have good reason to think they go back really far, indeed, to the Persian captivity when people were under their empire?
If you look at the ancient Babylonian captivity, the Babylonians had multiple groups under servitude, including our people, including some of the Arabs during that time. So when you deal with captivity, it's like today, right? You can have a group of people in captivity, but if you're pretty much in control, you're the ruling kingdom, then all kingdoms are subject to you. So anybody coming out of that region can make that claim, just like you have many groups in West Africa that people are not aware of today that make those same stances, have evidence to prove that their bloodline traces from ancient Israel. So do we dismiss those claims as well? Do we dismiss those people making those same claims and showing evidence?
Okay, well, when I look up at the last rabbi of Timbuktu, he doesn't look like a modern day Hebrew Israelite. So I don't really agree that they have that or that they're doing that.
How many roads? Too many signs, I can't read them. Wouldn't recognize the turn even if I seen it. Been driving